Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, the 10th meeting in 2013 of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. We have apologies from Marco Biaggi, David Torrance and Alison Johnson, and we have Joan McAlpin here as Marco Biaggi's substitute. Can I remind everyone, please, to turn off their mobile phones and other electronic devices. Okay, item 2 on the agenda. Can I ask for members' agreement to take item 6 in private, and whether our consideration of our draft report on the Renewables Obligation Scotland Amendment Order should be taken in private at future meetings? Members agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 3 on the agenda, subordinate legislation. We are taking evidence on the Renewables Obligation Scotland Amendment Order 2013 in draft. We have with us this morning Fergus Ewing, who is Minister for Energy, Enterprise and Tourism, joined this morning by let me get this right, Emma Thompson from the Legal Directorate at the Scottish Government, David Wilson, Director of Energy at the Scottish Government, and Cameron Maxwell from Forestry Commission Scotland. Welcome to you all. Thanks for coming along. Before we get into questions, Minister, would you like to say something by way of introduction?
Yes, good morning, Convener and members. Thank you very much indeed. The Renewables Obligation drives investment in renewable electricity capacity across Scotland. And since its introduction, the reduction of the Renewable Obligation in 2002, renewable electricity capacity across Scotland has almost quadrupled. Indeed, the final figures, Convener, for 2011 showed that renewable generation accounted for an equivalent 36% of gross electricity demand, well ahead of our interim target of 31%. We need to ensure this upward trend continues, and we want to see more generation coming from offshore wind, wave and tidal energy, sources where Scotland has a huge competitive advantage and can create world-leading industries. That is why it is vital that we keep the legislation fit for purpose, and vital we maintain its ability to continue attracting investment in new technologies and developments across Scotland in a way which is both cost-effective and sustainable. The amendments contained in the order before the committee today are designed to do that. We have, as is customary, tabled amendments that will apply across the rest of the UK. This approach is favoured by a majority and is fundamental to the successful and effective operation of the mechanism. However, as has been the case on previous occasions, there are some very important exceptions to that approach. The most prominent of these is our decision to restrict support for large-scale new biomass stations. The Scottish Government has taken a careful and distinct position on biomass over the last couple of years. Biomass energy can and does make an important contribution toward our renewables targets. It already contributes, Convener, more than 90% of the renewable heat generated in Scotland. It has attributes such as the ability to control output, which separate it from other renewable technologies and make it strategically valuable. But there are differences too, and it is those which have prompted us to revisit the role that biomass should play and the support which we should make available for it. These differences include the finite nature of the resource, its importance to other existing sectors and jobs, for example, the timber, sawmilling sector and panel product sector, and the need to ensure that the biomass is used is sustainably sourced. We believe there should be a greater focus on biomass in smaller energy projects and in generating stations which are either heat-only or which capture and use heat alongside electricity generated. That is why we have included an amendment which will apply to biomass stations with installed capacities above 15 megawatts and which do not provide good quality combined heat and power. This is a slightly higher ceiling, Convener, than we had originally proposed. This is firstly because our forecasts for additional supplies of wood in the marketplace mean that new capacity which might be built will not be likely to affect other users and indeed will create opportunities for businesses in the forest supply sector. The higher ceiling will also enable investment to take place subject to planning permission in sustainable developments at a reasonable scale, investments which could be vital to the continuation of existing businesses and to the continuation of the jobs associated with them. I'm aware this decision has prompted some questions on the part of some stakeholders. However, I believe that it is fully consistent with our desire to promote renewable heat and that it will not have an adverse impact on existing users of biomass material. I also believe that the new changes which have been proposed to the combined heat and power criteria relied upon by the obligation will ensure that stations must operate to sufficiently high energy efficiency standards. We will also be considering, Convener, over the coming months the introduction of tighter sustainability standards under the obligation following a recent consultation. These will ensure that biomass material must be sourced responsibly and in a way which minimises and eliminates any adverse impact. The second key difference in our order, Convener, is the retention of the ban for hydro generation at its current level of 1 ROC. We believe that there are risk and site-specific factors in Scotland which support our decision not to reduce the ban in the same way as the rest of the UK. Finally, we have proposed an amendment to the definition of microgenerator within the Scottish Order. This is to ensure that wave and tidal projects of up to 50 kilowatts remain eligible for the enhanced band of 5 ROCs. The remaining changes set out in our amending order are matched across the UK. Most notable amongst these are proposed reductions to the solar PV, landfill and onshore wind ROC bans. To sum up, Convener, these changes will improve efficiency and sustainability of obligation. They are designed to maintain confidence in the system, to continue attracting investment in the right kind of projects and to help continue the progress which we are making towards our very important renewable electricity targets while seeking to keep costs for consumers to a minimum. Before I formally move the motion recommending the order, Convener, I of course would be happy to seek to respond to any questions that you and members of the committee may have.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Before I look at other members who want to ask questions, maybe I could just start off by raising an issue that's come up in evidence the committee took, which is the concern there is in some quarters that we'll see a market created for wood chips or wood pellets being imported from other countries, perhaps where they do not have the same standards of sustainable forestry as we have in this country. Has the Scottish Government looked at this issue to see whether a market might be created and whether enough is being put in place to avoid imports of such materials?
Well, as I mentioned, Convener, there has been a consultation in the UK with regard to sustainability criteria, and that consultation will, we believe, lead to adoption probably throughout the UK of tighter standards, and we expect that legislation is likely to come forward next year. And that will look at issues such as an independent audit. It will look at issues such as greenhouse gas emissions. It will look at issues such as the further development of forestry certification and other methods of ensuring the sustainability of timber that's used. So on the one hand, that issue will be addressed by the next phase, if you like, of work which is being undertaken. You could say, well, why is this not being done right now? Why is it not being implemented right now? The belief that we have, and I think this is shared across the UK, is it's better to get it right than to rush it out. And these are complex issues and are being looked at carefully across the UK, and that's why there has been a separate consultation on that. So that's the first answer to your question. I think the second answer to your question, and I know that Cameron Maxwell will be able to give the technical detail to this, is that there are sort of commercial market cost issues here, cost of transporting wood, the market of wood, which, if you like, restrict the theoretical likelihood of mass importation of wood from other countries. But we do not, unlike south of the border, envisage that it's sensible for unrestricted ROCs to apply to new large-scale stations with biomass only. We don't think that that's the right route, and therefore we have taken a different approach from that applying south of the border. I don't know if Mr Maxwell perhaps has got, if with your permission, Convener, got perhaps some more information on the question that you raised.
I was just saying, particularly in relation to biomass sustainability criteria, one of the key things that we've done and agreed with the UK government is to ensure that the proposed sustainability criteria, which will be tight, follow sustainable forest management principles which have already been internationally agreed, and that should become the benchmark to ensure that it's only sustainably harvested and forest material that goes around the world. We already have a lot of material coming into the UK. The UK, I think, is about the 4th largest importer of timber in the world. So it's not something we're unused to. And we now have a new European regulation that's come through, the new EU timber regulation, which requires all material to demonstrate legality to start with. And that rule, together with the biomass sustainability criteria for both the RHI and the RO, and together with the procurement policy in the UK government of only allowing legal and sustainable material, all should fit together to ensure that we are only getting sustainable material coming into the country.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I just one follow-up question, Minister? The legislation you were talking about that was coming forward next year, is that UK-wide legislation?
Yes, it's a UK consultation, so we anticipate that it will be.
Okay, thank you. Right, I think Rhoda Grant caught my eye first.
It's always been stated government policy that biomass plants should be small-scale, off-gas grid, sustainable. We've had evidence that the move from 10 megawatts to 15 megawatts tends to fly in the face of this stated policy. What steps will you take to make sure that biomass is indeed small-scale, off-gas grid and sustainable?
Well, Rhoda Grant is right that we have always supported small-scale biomass, and in various parts of Scotland, for example Argyll, which I visited on Monday, there's probably not enough potential sources of heat for CHP schemes to go ahead, but small-scale biomass is increasingly being adopted. I was delighted to hear that one business in the Highlands that operates that I met on Monday that provides and installs small-scale biomass schemes is now receiving a considerable uptake from the public sector of the small-scale biomass schemes that are being introduced. So I was very pleased indeed to hear that. And I think that's a policy objective that's shared across all parties. We have had a slight increase in the threshold, convener, as Rhoda Grant rightly says, from 10 to 15 megawatts. I think my recollection is that in the submissions that we received the consultation, there were in fact 9 respondees who said this was a good thing. In taking that decision, we took into account a number of factors. First of all, that there is enormous potential to increase the output of low-grade wood in the region in the north of Scotland in particular, which will support better forest management, improve forest health and stimulate production of higher quality saw logs. And biomass CHP plants will provide a new market for low-grade wood that would be highly beneficial, and the forestry growing industry will therefore be able to grow. It was our judgment also, convener, that there were some particular schemes which, were we to have set the threshold too low, would not have been able to go ahead. And we did not think this was a prudent decision to take. We want to see these schemes going ahead. I think 2 of them in the northeast of Scotland have now got planning permission, and therefore are likely to be able to secure a very large number of jobs should they go ahead. We welcome that, and we think that that was one of the factors that we took account of in making the decision. And thirdly, of course, these are matters of balance, balancing the sustainability of the energy policy and the sourcing of the biomass material, and the need to stimulate investment and secure and protect jobs. So we think that the decision was the right decision. Had we stuck with 10 megawatts, then a lot of jobs in Scotland, I think, will not be created or would be at risk.
That really, I suppose, doesn't really answer my question. My question is, how do you stop biomass plant that is out with your stated aim of being small-scale, off-gas grid and sustainable being built, since you've changed this by 50%? I mean, it's not a small change in the megawatt output. It is from 10 to 15%. So that's a 50% jump in the size of biomass stations. How do you stop that? How will you monitor it? How will you make sure that we're not using wood in a way that's not sustainable?
Well, generators are required to provide annual sustainability information on the biomass feedstocks they use. In fact, this information, which includes tonnage, biomass type and format, country of origin, details, environmental certification, and GHG life cycle assessment, is published on the Ofgem website for transparency. So, I mean, there are clearly requirements for in terms of the enforcement and monitoring, which I think is an issue that Rhoda Grant has raised, for all of this information to be provided. It is provided, it's available, it's transparent. But the real answer to the question is that we have set a threshold of 50 megawatts. There is no threshold down south. We have set a threshold of 50 megawatts. My understanding of the evidence that was received on the 6th of March was that, some witnesses acknowledged that it is better to have some threshold than no, even if they had preferred that the threshold be set at a slightly lower level. So these are all matters of judgment, and the threshold of 15 megawatts will prevent the unconstrained use of biomass for new electricity-only generation. We do not think that was appropriate, and that is why we have taken a different approach in Scotland.
That really doesn't answer my question. How do you stop large-scale biomass from being put into train? You say your stated policy is small-scale, off-gas grid, sustainable. How does this measure prevent that happening? And do you have other measures that could prevent that happening?
Well, I think I have answered your question, and at least to my, from my perspective and with respect to the member convener, by saying that we have set a threshold of 50 megawatts for use of biomass for electricity only. Above that, ROCs will only be available for CHP plants, namely where electricity and heat are generated and the heat is used. And CHP plants have to meet good quality CHP status and have to produce significant levels of heat. Now, the question of efficiency of those plants is another issue to which I suspect we will come on. But the basic answer is that in Scotland, unlike in England, we have a twofold measure: a threshold of 50 megawatts for electricity only, and above that a requirement that combined heat and power, good quality, will receive ROCs, but only if they meet quite rigorous standards.
Good morning, Minister. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You mentioned, Minister, the discussions with the UK government. I wonder if I might bring about a comment that was made, or evidence that was presented to the committee on the 6th of March, thank you, regarding European involvement, whether the qualification for CHP plants above 15 megawatts, which we've just mentioned, accords with the directives of Europe in terms of the Renewable Energy Directive, which states that member states should promote conversion technologies for biomass which achieve a conversion efficiency of at least 85% for residential and commercial applications and at least 70% for industrial applications. I mean, have we had any conversation with Europe? Have we written to them? Have they written to us in terms of whether or not this complies with the directive?
There is no question, Convener, that the RO is fully in line with the requirements of the relevant European directive. I mean, I am aware, and I've looked at this in reasonable detail along with officials here, especially because this was raised by a number of members of the committee and some of the witnesses from whom the committee has heard. So I'm aware that the committee has heard concerns over the minimum efficiency requirement of 35%, which stations must meet to be considered good quality combined heat and power stations under the RO. Of course, the committee should be aware that the qualification as a CHP station under the RO has always depended upon this efficiency level. So this is not a new requirement. This is a continuation of existing good practice. And it's important to remember, and I think the witness from the Estover Energy last week, or the 6th of March convener, pointed this out, that 35% is a minimum. That doesn't mean that plants don't exceed that they're not more efficient than that. In some cases there are. And, you know, on a very basic level, all of us who use firewood know that you can get firewood which is various degrees of moisture in it, from absolutely soaking wet and not much use to anybody, to kiln dried, and that will burn almost instantaneously. So, you know, we have to take account of the reality that the need for stations to process and dry biomass fuel means that it would be wholly impracticable to set arbitrarily a higher minimum level than the fairly high level that's already set. And finally, my understanding is, and I'm not an expert in this, but I've been advised to this effect, that the standards in the UK are amongst the highest standards in relation to sustainability in the EU.
Good morning, Minister. I wonder if you could help perhaps put things into context for us with regard to the 15 megawatts and maybe give us an example. For instance, my understanding is that the Arjo, Wiggins and Macallan plants in the northeast, they may have not been viable if the threshold had been any lower. Would this have had a significant impact on those companies if it had been lower?
Well, obviously, we took account of all the representations that we received from developers, industry, from the timber sector, the panel products, and in a sense, the decision that we've taken, Convener, was always going to be a balance, as I said in my opening remarks. We took the view that there were two clear projects, which now I believe, I'm told, have got planning permission. One for a whisky distillery, a major successful world-renowned whisky distillery, and one for Arjo Wiggins, a very significant employer in the northeast. In both cases, we were advised that the capacity of a plant they're looking for is reasonably sizable. In both cases, we took the view that it would be reasonable to encourage rather than discourage such investment. And Dennis Robertson is absolutely right. Had we stuck with the 10 megawatt level, then we believe that the prospect of those plants proceeding would have been vastly reduced. We didn't want to threaten jobs. We want to see jobs created. I must say that Brian Adam lobbied as is appropriate, I believe, the constituency MSP for the Arjo Wiggins plant strongly on this matter, as he's quite right for him so to do, as did the company. So we took the view that a balanced decision should allow these projects to go ahead. They are not mega projects a la Drax. They are on an appropriate scale. And we also took the view, Convener, that, as I said in my opening statement, that this decision could be taken without jeopardising the supply for existing users whose needs are extremely important. Companies such as Norbord, BSW, James Jones, companies that have committed to rural Scotland, have served rural Scotland, created jobs, secured jobs for decades or longer in many cases. So we had to take account of their needs. So we only proceeded after very careful analysis, and Mr. Maxwell is a bit of an expert in this, which led us to conclude that there may be around between an additional 700,000 tonnes to 1 million tonnes of timber available each year. In other words, that there's enough for everybody, putting it crudely, perhaps over crudely and bluntly, there's enough for everybody. And also, had we not done that, Convener, then of course we wouldn't be stimulating the market for timber growers and contractors. Now, I know Mr. Mackenzie is well aware of the difficulties facing timber growers and contractors in rural Scotland. It's a tough job to make viable. It's been littered with cases of people losing their jobs. I do not want them to lose their jobs. I want these jobs to be secure. So, on balance, we felt that in order to give a stimulus to timber growers, to provide new markets, to provide new opportunities for revenue, to provide them with the opportunity to be more profitable, to use those profits to plant more trees, which I think is a good thing, then we thought that we should take a balanced decision. So to answer Dennis Robertson's question, I think we have got the right decision here. I very much hope that when the committee debates this later on, it will come to that same conclusion.
Minister, perhaps just on a slightly off tangent point is that the carbon footprint with a lot of these companies supplying the fuel from the sort of forest to the plants. Is it my understanding that they've set a cap on the distance that wood would travel to these plants to ensure that there's a suitable carbon footprint? For instance, in Muchan Peninsula there, I think one of the companies, whisky companies, travel, I think it's less than 10 kilometres. My understanding is there's a 50 kilometre cap. Is that the case?
I'm not aware of such a cap. I'll ask Mr. Maxwell just to clarify in a moment, but plainly we want to see sustainable management of our forestry, and we think that the decision that we've taken will help to contribute towards that by making more profitable, more viable the various industries, contracting, felling, growing, that depend upon the decision and will be affected by the decision we take. But I'm not aware of any specific fixed
industry
limit
itself.
But perhaps Mr. Maxwell could just clarify this with your permission, Convener.
There isn't, I'm not aware of any cap obviously the two examples that have been spoken about are Estover Energy, which I think had indicated in their documentation for their planning that they're looking at an average distance of around 50 miles. Clearly, it makes a lot more sense when you're transporting a low value commodity product to transport it as little as you can, and that is seen as one of the values of having sort of local plants, is it will track the local wood, the local low grade wood, and rather having it travel longer distances. But simply put, the further you go for your wood supply, the more expensive it becomes for you. So companies will try and focus as locally as they can to get the material. The bigger they are, the further they'll have to go for wood, depending on how well forested the area is.
Fine, thank you very much. Thank you.
I think Rhoda had a brief supplementary.
Just on the examples that Dennis Robertson mentioned, my understanding is they are combined heat and power examples, and that for rocks for combined heat and power, you would qualify for rocks for combined heat and power, and there is also a built-in 5-year leeway if you can only provide electricity. You are allowed to do that for 5 years over the term of the agreement. To me, it seems that mitigates against any of the disadvantages, and therefore there isn't the requirement to put from 10 to 15. Those projects would have gone ahead with a fair amount of leeway should circumstances have changed for them.
Well, we don't agree, obviously, because we have set the 5-year provision that if a heat source, a heat client, a heat customer is lost, then there needs to be a means, a time within which the generator can find another customer. And indeed, one of the impediments, convener, to the take-up of CHP schemes is the lack of customers for the heat, especially in rural areas. There aren't many customers that need heat in the volume sufficient to make viable a 10, 15 megawatt station. Of course, as Rhoda Grant will know, a great many distilleries are looking at biomass stations, and they tend to be in the range perhaps of a few megawatts up to 10, and that's a good thing. But we don't want to disinhibit those who have larger needs simply because, for the purposes of investing in a new plant, they can't have the confidence that the return will be there. I mean, who's going to invest in plants unless they know, the investors know, there's going to be a reasonable likelihood that the return will be as promised? For that reason, we have to acknowledge, as we've done with the 5-year provision, that time needs to be available for an alternative heat customer to be found. These are difficult practical issues, and therefore, without this provision, we believe that, although in theory the plants could be built, the lack of confidence for investors would mean and mitigate in practice that they wouldn't be built. So, with respect, I think, convener, that the approach that Rhoda Grant seems to be advocating, or maybe she's just interrogating me as is entirely appropriate, but were she advocating this approach, the jobs will not go ahead, the projects will not go ahead. So that's a decision, I think, for each member to weigh up and balance when they come to vote in this matter today.
I'm just trying to tease out, because the 5-year is supposed to allow for the very problem that the Minister is alluding to, the 5-year gap, to allow you to have electricity only when you have a heat and power plant. So it seems to me he's got belt and braces. There's the 5-year plus 15 megawatts. So you could actually have something churning out electricity for 5 and getting rocks at a much larger scale with the 5 years and with the increased megawatts.
No, I mean, the provision of rocks is for CHP. It's for combined heat and power. Heat must be produced, otherwise rocks will not be awarded. The 5-year provision is if the customer is lost, and then there's a need to find another customer for the heat. So I don't think that criticism is one that I would accept.
Right, Mike McKenzie.
Thank you, convener. Just to move on to another area covered by this order, the Minister will probably be aware of the proposal in Yale for what would appear to be the world's first community-owned tidal generator, and I'm sure you're also aware with the limpet machine in Isla. Is it? I'm therefore I'm glad to see the enhanced rocks for smaller scale wave and tide machines. Do you anticipate that this will give rise to more of these throughout Scotland, or create that opportunity?
Well, that's really for the industry, I think, to deliver. What we need to provide is the right incentive, the right investment framework. And as I've just said, the confidence that those who are pursuing small-scale wave and tidal projects need to be able to proceed with a very major investment, even at small scale, in nascent technologies. And I'm aware of the Olympic case. In fact, I had a presentation of that when I was attending and speaking at a recent conference on wave and tidal power in London. We are very keen indeed to see the smaller scale projects, convener, regarding wave and tidal proceed. And that's why we have introduced the measure in relation to 50 kilowatts and to preserve the level of incentive that's required. So whether or not these devices succeed will depend upon their technical development, will depend upon their efficacy, but there already have been effective trialling of devices that are producing electricity, and now we want to see that move on to prototype and demonstration array. And Scotland has got a relative lead in these areas, but this particular measure will encourage the smaller scale entrant, I think, to continue their development, and that's a good thing.
Thank you very much. That's all I have on that.
Members want to come in? If not, I've got a couple of questions just to clarify matters that came up in evidence. First of all, Minister, when we took evidence from the Wood Panel Industries Federation, one issue that they raised with us was the prospect that because these restrictions are being put in Scotland on biomass plants in terms of the 15 megawatt cap, but are not being applied south of the border, that might create a market for Scottish wood to be transported down south. Is that something that the Scottish Government has considered?
Well, yes, it is, and I'm aware that the witnesses from whom you heard raised this to a greater or lesser degree of emphasis. I mean, plainly, the government in Westminster has decided that new biomass stations should be continuing to receive ROCs without restriction. We disagree with that, and that is clear. But we can't. We're not able commercially to prevent those operators from purchasing wood in Scotland. As I understand it, under the current arrangements, at least that is view I believe that Westminster takes it at any rate. My understanding is that so far the plans that have been mooted are for existing coal-fired power stations to co-fire, in other words, biomass and coal. Drax is one company that has been mentioned in this respect, and that my understanding is that their intention is to have long-term supply arrangements for the importation of wood in pelletised form, perhaps from countries such as the USA. One can understand that if they're investing in this kind of project, their investors will need the comfort of long-term supply contracts. Otherwise, why would you invest in it? So commercially, that information does seem to have a certain sense behind it from an economic point of view, although it's very much opposed by environmental lobby on environmental grounds. But the fact that my understanding is that, and Mr. Maxwell again knows a great deal more than me about this, but my understanding is that the expectation is that companies such as Drax, operating existing coal-fired power stations, converting to coal-firing, are likely to source their material from imports, are likely to import it in pelletised form, and it will be shipped from the USA to ports. It's likely that the arrangements will be made on a practical level for pelletised material to be used rather than whole logs. I mean, I think you've already heard evidence that this is not something that's, whole logs aren't going to find their way into Drax's ovens, as it were. I mean, it's not feasible. But there is the possibility that there will be, if you like, predation in the Scottish market. The last thing I would say is that, as Mr. Maxwell has already alluded to, transportation costs are a key factor here. And it doesn't make economic sense for Norbord to import, to obtain woody material from some of the more inaccessible parts of the Northwest Highlands or from southern Argyll. The costs of transporting wood that distance, even in Scotland, makes that uneconomic. That's just one of the factors of the industry as I understand it. So the additional transport costs, certainly as far as the north and northeast of Scotland are concerned, of the likelihood of wood from that part of the country going to England is reduced because of the reality of the transport cost, convener. But there are risks. I don't say they don't exist, but I think perhaps they should be seen in that perspective, and it might be useful, if permission, if Mr. Maxwell could add anything to my general remarks.
Just a couple of points. There is a history and a general trade of exporting timber from Scotland to the north of England. The bulk of Scottish timber is processed in Scotland, but there's a big sawmill in Carlisle, for instance, owned by BSW, and there's also the big paperboard plant at Workington. And traditionally that plant has looked to the west parts of the southwest and the west of Scotland, and increasingly making use of the significant resources, for instance, available in Mull, and sea shipping has helped that along. On sort of pellet markets and, for instance, the large-scale power stations such as Drax, I understand that Drax are looking to build 2 pellet plants in the United States. Because of the volume that people at Drax are looking for, they're looking for millions of tonnes of material in pellet form, which simply isn't available in Scotland. Our pellet producers are all having quite a lean time of it generally just now, because the small-scale commercial and domestic pellet market hasn't yet picked up, but we see that starting to happen. They, I understand, don't particularly want to get into bed with people at Drax, partly because they don't have the volume to give to people at Drax, and also because the margins aren't very good. Drax want wafer-thin margins for relatively low-quality pellets, but principally they need volume, and Scotland and pellet producers don't have volume. And Drax tend to use pellets because they're easy to handle, easy to move, and easy to use in their furnaces.
Thank you. Chick Brody, you want to come in?
Yeah, let me ask a naive question. When I did company turnarounds, I got involved with a company, timber felling company up in Argyll, and just hearing the issues of transportation costs and what we've talked about in terms of communities, what's the restriction on having variable rocks depending on geography?
Well, that's not something I've considered. I think it would be somewhat difficult doing something somewhat dangerous, which is thinking out loud. But
oh, please go on.
Yes, well, I thought you might say that. But how would you set out a variable rock for mainland areas where the difference in cost is a matter of degree? I think it may well be very difficult, if impossible, to administer such a system.
So in favour of areas like the Highlands and Islands, clearly you need customers, but looking at things like regional development funds that have applied in terms of enterprise, would that be possible? Is it even worth considering?
Well, first of all, I would say is that that there is a considerable amount of work that goes on to try to develop to tackle the problems of transportation of timber. There are groups that sit in the north of Scotland and other parts of Scotland, the timber transport consultation groups, I believe, and they look at various issues, such as one plea has been that timber lorries driving in forests should not have to pay tax on fuel when they're not actually, if you like, using the public highways. That plea has got precisely nowhere from the UK government, but there's got a certain common sense behind it. Secondly, the measures that I've announced, I think will be welcome to timber growers, precisely because they will allow timber growers to open up some areas of forestry in the Northwest Highlands, in remote and up till now relatively inaccessible areas, inaccessible for economy as well as partly through geography. In other words, the increased incentives to biomass use will create a bigger market, will create more potential customers for timber growers, and that will allow the development of some forestry which is currently inaccessible. The extent to which it happens is something which we will keep closely under review, I think not for the first time, Mr. Brodie, in sort of throwing a googly, has opened an interesting area of inquiry, and one which might merit further consideration in due course, because we do want those most rural parts of the country and foresters there and farmers, landowners tree growers to have a fair crack of the whip and to be able to market and sell their product, because if they can't plant more trees, can they? And we see the unfortunate situation of a lot of wind blow of trees that frankly just cannot be harvested because the economics don't stack up. So, I'm hoping that this measure will make a contribution to this problem today. How significant that contribution can be is something that I would welcome the committee's input on as time goes on.
Thank you.
Grant?
Yes, can I just go back to the quality assurance scheme? And you rightfully said that the UK government are consulting and possibly legislating on this. Would you consider, if that legislation doesn't bring it closer into line with what the European commissioners are stating as being good quality, would the Scottish Government consider legislating separately on what would be termed good quality?
Well, the member asked me to answer a hypothetical question, which is something that almost in principle I'm reluctant to do. I mean, I think to be fair to the UK government, let's look at the consultation responses and consider what measures are appropriate. And by all means, let the committee, once we have formulated a viewpoint on these matters, question me at that point. I think that would be perfectly reasonable. But I do have to repeat that there's no question that the existing RO is fully in line with the requirements of the European Directive. I mean, the question presupposes that we are out of step, out of line, illegal. We are not. We're in step, in line, and have amongst the highest sustainability standards. And as we have already heard, the 35% minimum is just that. It's a minimum which applies to larger stations and is in practice often exceeded. So we do look forward to bringing forward further sustainability standards, but there are existing sustainability criteria which are very important. We're considering the responses to consultation and we'll make further announcements in due course.
Okay, can I maybe just ask one final technical question, Minister? The Subordinate Legislation Committee have given us the shocking news that there is an error in Article 7 of the order, in that, appallingly, there's an incorrect reference in two places. What is stated as being a quote, qualified combined heat and power station, unquote, should in fact be a, quote, qualifying combined heat and power generating station, unquote. I'm sure you were as shocked as we were, Minister, to discover this appalling error in the order. And I wonder if you could tell us what steps the Scottish Government will take to try and remedy this.
Well, I think we'll keep the Subordinate Legislation Committee, and thank goodness for its work. But Mr. Wilson is the expert in errors. So, thank you. So, and the correction thereof, I should say. So.
I can confirm it is an error. It has been, it will be rectified. The term generating should be included there. I don't think it has any greater significance than that, but we'll follow the usual procedure to make that amendment.
Thank you. Right, if there are no more questions from members, we can move to the next item on the agenda, and that is, I will invite the Minister, if he would speak to and move motion S4M 05912 on approval of a statutory instrument.
Well, I think I've already made a fairly extensive remarks, so I would adopt those remarks and simply formally move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Minister. Do any members wish to speak on this order? Would I?
Can I just speak? Obviously, there are aspects of the order that are very welcome. However, we do have concerns about the change to the ceiling from 10 to 15, and also the quality aspects of emissions, and understand that that is being consulted on and indeed legislated on by the UK government. With those concerns to the fore, and possibly looking for assurance that the Minister would keep that under review, keep monitoring the situation, then we would support the order at this stage if he was able to give that reassurance.
Yeah, before I invite the Minister to come in, I wonder, do any other members wish to comment?
I would
Mike McKenzie.
Convener, just wish to say that in considering this, it seems to me that there's been a very careful balance struck between the needs of industry and investors on one hand and the concerns of the environmental community on the other hand, and that I welcome the Scottish Government differentiating itself from the approach taken by the UK Government. But I also give a particular welcome to the increase, the ROCs designation for small-scale tidal and wave generation in order to support these exciting new technologies. So, considering in the round, I think this order is to be welcomed, and I hope the committee go along with that view.
Any other members wish to speak?
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, I agree with Mike McKenzie. I think that clearly after the extensive consultation, that I think the Minister and his team should be congratulated on bringing forward what is a more than reasonable situation. The only request I would have, dealing with state aid and another issue, is that we make sure that DEC pursue with Europe as quickly as possible, so we can get the show on the road as quickly as we possibly can. And the DEC are not, once again, dragging their heels.
Okay, any other members wish to contribute? If not, Minister, I invite you to wind up. Perhaps you could respond to the points that have been made.
Yes, well, first of all, I'm happy to provide the assurance to Rhoda Grant that we will keep these matters closely under review. I think I did make that clear during my remarks, but I'm happy to provide an assurance that we will keep specifically under review the issue of the sustainability in relation to CHP schemes. Secondly, we work very closely with DEC, the ministers and DEC, so we will continue to do that. And with, I think, those two replies, Convener, I would very much welcome the support of the committee of this measure.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. Right, at this point I will therefore put the question. The question is that motion S4M 05912 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for your officials. We'll have a short suspension just to allow a changeover. Reconvene. I remind members we're still in public session. Right, we move to item 5 on the agenda, and we have 2 negative instruments to consider. The first of which is SSI 2013-58, and secondly 2013-59. Members will have a paper explaining the background to these. Does anybody have any comments that they wish to make on these? No, I mean, I think it's fair to say these are fairly uncontroversial. Are members content to make no recommendation, firstly, in relation to the fees in the Register of Scotland Consequential Provisions Amendment Order 2013? Okay, agreed. And secondly, are members content to agree that we make no recommendation in relation to the Electricity Applications for Consent Amendment Scotland Regulations 2013? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, at that point we close the public part of the meeting and move into private session.